Hello and welcome to our second episode, exciting, of Penny Dreadful podcast. We are doing Ask for Andrea or Andrea. I
Ask for
guess there's
Andrea.
kind of a 50-50 split on how you pronounce that name. We
Yeah,
are
I
undecided.
I listened to the audiobook, so Andrea is how they pronounced it, so that's kind of how I thought of it.
Andrea. Okay,
Andrea, yeah.
Yeah, I just keep saying
Andrea.
Andrea. I used to have a friend named Andrea, so but like that's the only time I've ever seen it before this book, so I'm just like that's my association with it.
That's fair. So this week, Jackie, you're the one that recommended it to us.
Yes, I did. Izzy, say your name.
Izzy.
Okay, that's her. We use I'm sorry, it was funny. Okay, anyway, continuing. We used to host a true crime podcast.
Used to,
Okay, we host a true crime podcast
or
that
just
has
really
we're on a break.
we're
A
taking a
really
break.
long hiatus.
Yeah, I got pregnant like 2.5 years ago, somewhere around there, and we haven't recorded since, but we are
Yeah.
going to get back to it. And I saw this book on Goodreads, I think, and it was about a serial killer, and no one has caught on to his case yet. But the only people who are aware are the like spirits or ghosts of the women he's killed. And I read the back and I was like, oh my God, this sounds like the best book I've ever heard of. So I immediately recommended it to Sammy. And I was like, you have to read this with me. And then I sent it to Izzy and was like, you have to read this with me. And that is how the book club got started. And here we are. So very exciting. The birth of a book club slash podcast, a book club podcast, if you will. Does anyone have any overarching questions before we get into the synopsis?
Before we do, I just want to give some background information like I did last week. The genre is thriller suspense. The pages is 295 pages. It was first published in April of 2022. So just some handy information for everybody out there.
Okay.
So
And
I have a basic preemptive question. Uh just I'm sure some viewers will be interested to know. Do the two of you believe in ghosts?
Yes,
I do. Yeah.
100%.
So do you believe that people could in theory then see us and like interact with us?
Yes.
I agree.
What about you, Jackie?
I do. You know, I haven't sat down and thought about it in a while, but I think so. I think it's just comforting to think that like some of your energy or your essence kind of stays after you leave, or the people you love's energy or essence or something, you know? I don't know. It's a nice thought.
I do love that the red shoe is in the foreground.
Okay, so this, because I read it as an audiobook, this was not the cover I had originally seen. I love this cover.
They say don't judge a book by its cover, but we do.
We
We
do.
do.
Oh,
Especially
yeah.
because I will say it's getting more and more frequent for self-published books to be on Kindle and the other like ebook reading platforms. I've borrowed enough books from Kindle Unlimited and the other ebook series, and I can tell that it's like self-published by like the language they're using or typos or anything. I don't even try to force myself to finish it. I immediately just return it. I can't do it anymore. It's gotten bad. So if I see a cover that's very like, I don't want to say amateurish, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Am I crazy? I don't know. I can't do it anymore. I've tried to get through it, but just I think what kills it for me is the conversations that people have in those books. you can tell immediately, like a professional writer from an amateur one, because if you like imagine it playing out, there's no way that real people would say those conversations to each other. It
Yeah.
makes it pretty obvious.
As someone that is actively studying fiction in college, I will say dialogue is something that I think 90% of up and coming writers struggle with, because the way people have dialogue in a book is not the way people talk in real life. Because the way people talk in real life, like you're gonna have ums and awkward pauses, and like people misspeak words sometimes. And if you're really excited, like you can see that. So translating kind of like a normal conversation onto the page can be a little difficult and is an art form in itself. I definitely struggle with dialogue. So yeah, that's why having like an editor and workshopping and proofreading is so important to the publication process. I hope
I will
that was
say
helpful.
I feel validated personally. Thanks.
Okay, before we jump into this is a reminder that this is a very spoiler heavy podcast. We get into all aspects of the book, including any twists, whodunits, mysteries, and the ending. So please keep that in mind before listening to the rest. Preferably listen if you have already read it, or if you don't plan on reading it, or if you don't care about spoilers.
Getting into this story, you crack open this book, and the first thing that happens is a pretty terrible murder of a young woman. And as the man is on top of her, strangling her, she is, so you're kind of reading from her perspective. She's being strangled, and then she somehow manages to like get up and sprint away. And she looks back and she can see him, and you realize at the same time she does that she did not survive the encounter. That's her body on the ground, and her spirit is what is up and running away. And so that's your introduction into the book. And you read that and you're like, holy shit, like chapter 1, 5 pages in, some girl's been murdered, and you're like, all right, let's go, let's go. So basically, this guy is not a very nice guy. I think he was described as looking like Ryan Gosling.
No,
um,
what's his face? The dude that played Thor. Chris Hemsworth. That's the guy.
so this girl that was murdered, she was the one that was, rewind a little bit. So this guy is pretty attractive, and he meets these women by going online and starting like a dating profile and meeting them through the different apps and then inviting them out. In most cases, the main ghost at first is the first woman that he's killed. And she realizes she's a ghost pretty early on, pretty immediately. And she makes the decision that she doesn't want to hang around her body. So she gets in the car, her ghost gets in the car with him as he drives away, and she enters this guy's life. She inserts herself in there. Like, this book is really difficult to explain because there's so many time jumps in it. Book goes from one ghost to the next ghost to the next ghost to kind of talk about their point of view simultaneously, kind of their journey as ghosts. So there's not a distinct timeline to follow. But the first woman he murders follows him home and meets his family. And I know we all have kind of differing opinions on the way this ghost in particular treats his family, because it turns out not only is he married, he has 2 children at home, 2 young daughters,
Two sweet little kids.
2 angel babies. And I'll have you guys jump in when I'm done kind of explaining. But from my point of view, this ghost walks into the home and sees his wife and is like, how are you married to this murderer? Like, you fool. what are you doing? And she's kind of angry, like, how are you supporting this person? Blah blah blah. And I know that you guys have different opinions on how she treats the wife, or the viewpoints on the wife, or is that later?
That's later. I have a
Okay,
problem with the ending treatment of
with
the
the
wife.
later. Okay. So initially, she doesn't care about the family or anything at all. But as like time goes on, she realizes that if she gets angry enough, she can kind of influence the environment in the way that she can turn lights off or make them flicker, or she can turn the computer off if she gets like angry enough and uses that emotion. We kind of move on from there to the next murder. And the next murder is the one that the book starts off with. He picks her up at a date and he roofies her. Am I mixing these up? Is the
So the first murder was the one with the extension cord by your trash cans. The second murder was the
That's
one in
right.
the woods with the scarf. And the third one was the barista girl.
Okay. Okay. So this one was the one that was roofied from the date.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. All right. Cut that part out because I was right. God damn it. Okay. As the date comes to an end, she feels like very drunk and it turns out she had been drugged and she gets in his car. He's very smooth talking and he's attractive. So she's like, sure, you can drive me home. That sounds good. And he doesn't drive her home. He drives her out to the woods in the middle of nowhere and murders her in the same fashion as he murdered the first woman, as most killers do, with, as we talked about before, with the strangulation with her scarf. And then she runs out into the middle of the woods. And as she's running, she hears a woman calling her name, but she doesn't look back because she's terrified and she never finds the woman. And eventually, she finds her way back to her body where the murder scene happened. And it's so sad, but the book talks about like how she watches like her body decompose and the animals getting into her body and stuff. And it talks about how a raven picks up her shoe and moves it more towards the roadway. So she starts hoping that maybe a passing car will see her shoe and stop and discover her body. And it takes a long time, but eventually that's exactly what happens. A car is driving and stops and sees the shoe, and then it turns out that woman called the police and said like, hey, there's something suspicious on this road, you should check it out. And eventually a detective does. So when the detective finds the shoe, she ends up following the shoe to the woman's body, and then the ghost kind of latches on to this detective and follows her back to society. This is kind of how she starts integrating herself into the case and starts following along with what's happening. And then you, as the reader attached to this ghost, also get the inside look from the police perspective on what's happening with the case and everything. And at this point, there has been another murder by the same man. He had been visiting a coffee shop every day, and he gets a little sloppy with this one. He ends up picking her up in his car, the car that's registered in his real name and his real wife's name, and ends up driving her out to, I guess, the middle of nowhere again, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yeah.
And he kills her. She ends up making her way back to her family. And so that's almost worse than the one that watched her own decomposing body, because then it's the family just like starting to realize that she's missing, and it follows like that process with her parents. This is kind of the case where he eventually gets caught because of the mistakes he made with it. They were able to find video camera feeds from where she was picked up that showed his car. Eventually, they get a search warrant, and this guy can feel the noose kind of getting tighter and tighter. So when the detective meets with the other detective that's handling, because there's 3 cases now, the ghosts all kind of meet each other at this point. And so they end up sticking together in a way that they can start to relay information about like their different cases, and they all know what's going on. At this point, they could tell that something was going on with their killer. And so they all make the decision to stay with him because they know something's going to happen. He ends up rounding his family up and driving out to a cabin in the middle of the woods, which is never ever a good sign. And his wife goes along with him for some reason. It's like, okay, yeah, sure.
Now, don't you start mistreating her too.
And then they make it to the cabin in the woods, even though the girls kind of use their ghost powers to do everything they can to stop him because they know that this guy is a serial killer while his wife is still wearing her blinders on. Or wearing her blinders. And they try everything they can do to stop him. They like turn out his headlights in the car and other things, but it doesn't stop him. They just, in the middle of the night, drive to the cabin in the woods somehow without headlights. Very dangerous, especially with two kids in the car, but I guess he was desperate. So they make it to the cabin and things go downhill very fast. Um, Instead of 180 days of meals prepared, they realized that 180 days would have been just him and his wife. So now they have to add 2 more meals every single meal because they have the 2 babies, which cuts down, what did they say, like 60 days, 60 something days of food.
Mm-hmm.
This makes him very antsy, kind of at the most riveting point in the book. He goes outside and the ghosts are able to wake the wife up to try to get her out of the house. Like the entire time they're at the cabin, they're like screaming at her, trying to give her signs like, get out, something bad's gonna happen. And this is the first time they're really able to like reach her is like while she's sleeping, and they're like, get out. And she wakes up. She goes outside and she can hear him digging. And the ghosts follow him out to see what he's doing. And he's dug 3 graves in the woods. And at this point, the wife realizes what he's planning. He's planning to kill them all. So she hatches like a desperate escape plan. She cannot find the keys because he's hidden them. And so she takes the kids and she says, hey, let's go look for some berries for daddy for dinner. And they run away. Somehow, the husband figures out the plan, the serial killer. He starts searching for them desperately. Like he grabs the keys from wherever he's hidden them. He's like driving up and down the road, and the ghosts are all like, one stays with him so they know where he's at all times, and one stays with the wife and the kids. And he's just frantically searching for them because he knows if they get away, like he's done for. He doesn't catch them and they make it to safety and they win. The police catch the serial killer, and that's
Well,
kind of,
hold on, let me jump in here. When they showed up at the bar, he was waiting for them. We
well,
forget the whole.
yeah. So that, I guess that was a big plot of this story. Background information. Ladies, I'm sure you've seen or at least heard of, I think they call them angel shots, is the ones that I've heard of, where if you talk to a bartender or something and you ask for an angel shot, like it's supposed to be a code word that like help me or call the police or something, like something's wrong. I don't know if either of you have heard them called by anything else.
I think angel shots are the most common. I think in other places they do things like in this book they have like a ask for so and so or whatever, like someone that doesn't work there, because then it's like a more inconspicuous thing.
Mhm.
Um, like I haven't been to too many bars, so I've never like seen it in action or anything, thankfully. But I'm hearing it's a more common thing to have like the angel shot or to ask for a certain employee or whatever.
So this book kind of has something like the angel shot. Basically, there's a poster in the bathroom that says, if anything's wrong or your date's going wrong and you need to get away or you need help, ask for Andrea at the bar and they'll call the police for you, basically. When they walk into the first building they see, they're exhausted. She has 2 kids with her. And of course, as soon as they walk in, like he's at the bar, like waiting for them. But they manage to kind of walk around the bar and he doesn't see them. So they make it to the bathroom. And in the bathroom they find that poster. So when someone's like trying to get into the bar, the bartender has to come investigate to see what's going on. Like, why is this bathroom locked? She asks for Andrea. The police are called. Their lives are saved. But this is like a theme throughout the book because when the second woman was on her date with the serial killer, she had went to the bar. She was in a bar and she went to the bar's bathroom, and there was a poster that said, if your date's going wrong, ask for Andrea at the bar and we'll call the police for you. And she like brushed it off because her date was going fine. She felt great. And then she was murdered that night. So that's how the author kind of brought it full circle, which was a really cool twist that it ended up being the thing that saved the wife and her daughters. And then they arrested his dumbass. And
Got
hopefully
him.
he got the electric chair. But I do want to say, like, in this book, I've never read this anywhere else, and I love this. There's not really a heaven for spirits or ghosts to move on to. Instead, they can see every memory they've ever had very clearly, even like basically through infancy on, almost as if it was happening in real time. So they can like enter almost like a meditative state and just like replay these memories throughout their life. If they replay a memory in their life where someone has died, the other person who has passed on can feel that and can then interact with the new ghost or spirit or whatever, and they can breach time and space, I guess, and just live together.
Yeah, it's if you don't mind me jumping in here, I'm
Yes,
sorry.
please, because I loved it, but I'm having a really hard time explaining it for some
So
reason.
the way I kind of understood it is that like there's an infinity of memories that every single person has connected to everybody else. Everybody's memories has somebody else in it. So throughout that, there's like an infinity of connected memories. And so when you die, when you choose to pass on, you pass into those memories. And if you meet a loved one, like the second victim met her Nana, Nana's then able to say, okay, you're ready, come with me. And then they live forever in those memories and they can travel through anybody's memories together. So, like, they could go into the Nana's memories and then go into like a cousin's memories. So, it's just kind of like an infinity of living with your loved ones again and getting to see and experience all of those shared memories. And I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, the story doesn't end with the arrest of the serial killer, although thank God he gets arrested. Instead, the other girls all have loved ones that's passed away, except for the most recent ghost, the most recently murdered woman, I guess. Her family is all still alive, like her mother and father. She's an only child, but they stay with her over time as she goes through her memories, and they don't pass on until she finds someone that she can relate to. And she ended up finding like a great aunt or something in one of her memories that she could reach out to and connect with other members of her family. And
And
then
you know, I think one of you guys said it previously, but you know they would have stayed with her if she couldn't find anybody.
yeah, until
It's
her
so
mother or
moving.
father had like passed. But yeah, that was just the friendship that they cultivated in their afterlife was just a really beautiful part of this book. I know we said it on the last one. I gave this book a 98 out of 100, and I will read this again, probably another 10 times, and I would recommend it to everybody. It was beautiful.
Since you gave us the synopsis, do you want to jump right into your thoughts or do you want us to do your thoughts on the book last?
I'll do mine first because mine are the most important.
Oh, okay.
So I already told you guys what I thought of the book, my overall rating. And I didn't get to finish this book right away. I started it like right as finals, or it was right before finals week when every paper and stuff is due for class. So I had to put it down and just work on all these stories, on these papers and stuff for school. And I didn't get to put it up for like 3 or 4 days. And I was having the worst dreams about like serial killers and women
Oh
getting
no.
worried. Like that's how clearly she writes, though. It's like it really puts you into the scenes. It's crazy. So I recommend finishing it in one sitting. So one of my notes here is all the detectives had different personalities. And I think that's something that's really hard in other books that I've read. if this story is not centered around a detective, if the detective is not the first person or the main character, all the detectives kind of tend to have the same personalities. But in this book, she wrote like the different detectives all had different personalities, and like different departments were handling it differently. So I really liked how that all came together, especially because the girls were all following different police officers at different times in the story. So it was nice to see like some detectives were like rock stars and really caring about the case and handling it well, and other detectives were like brushing it off and putting it off to do other things and not frankly giving a shit. Oh, we didn't talk about this in the synopsis, but when they figure out that they can manipulate people, they find that when people are sleeping, they can whisper in their ears, they can talk to people, and that people will like, I'm not sure how to say it, accept that message, like they can
They can understand it.
internalize it, they can understand it.
Yeah.
When the detective we were talking about doesn't give a shit about it was the middle woman that had been murdered. Her case wasn't going to be like wrapped with the other ones because they didn't have enough evidence. And these ghosts together went to that detective and like screamed in his ear every night, and it gave him the worst nightmares until he actually like did something.
Did
And
I thought they did that with the murder. I didn't remember them doing that with the detective.
oh yeah.
Oh, did I? Oh, I might have missed a spot. I'll have to go back
What
and read it.
do you remember that, Sam? I might be making stuff up, but I remember.
No, I feel like I remember one of them yelling at one of like the male detective.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah,
The
but
male
I
detective that didn't care.
I didn't think it was while he was asleep. I thought it was in his office. Was what I thought. But like I said, maybe I just misread it.
Oh, maybe. They end up manipulating it. They end up like getting him to like recheck evidence, and eventually enough evidence is found that her case could be wrapped up with the other girls's, and they all were charges brought against the serial killer.
Which is great.
Mhm.
They all got like their cases were brought against the killer. It made me really happy.
I think that's most of my, I kind of like weaved my thoughts into the book as I gave the synopsis. So you guys go, and then I'll just have things to say about yours.
Okay. No pressure though, right?
No, I have like my little "you're wrong" buzzer right here.
Oh, okay.
It's ready to
Like
go.
I did. So it's
Yeah.
fair, it's fair. All right. Well, Sam, do you want to go or do you want me to?
I can go.
Okay.
Well, do we
So
have any like, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I know this is going back on everything I just said, but do we have any like just open-ended questions we want to ask now about the book before we start like doing more specific? Did you like the way that ghosts were portrayed in this book, or would you have preferred them portrayed a different way?
No, I thought this was really refreshing. Like I thought the way the ghosts were done and the afterlife was done was pretty wonderful. And I'll get into that during mine. But what did you think, Sam?
yeah, I mean that was gonna be my first talking point was how I felt about the ghosts.
Oh, perfect. Okay, well, I will scoot my way back.
I asked you guys how you felt about ghosts too because I'm a firm believer in ghosts. It, you you cannot convince me that they don't exist. I've always felt like presences around. You know, I don't know necessarily like I've ever actually seen anything, but I heavily believe that like spirits can hang around and they can interact with people. Reading a book that finally portrayed that kind of thing, like in a weird little way, was very validating for me. I really liked the way that like ghosts are handled because it just doesn't seem like that's usually a thing. At least the books I've read. I really liked the the memory jumping, like that's how they handled the afterlife. I thought that was a very, very cool concept that I had never thought about before.
I agree.
I think I scored it a 97. Just not particularly because anything was wrong with it, but just I wish it was longer. That was my only like I wanted more just because I loved it so much. I felt like it wrapped up perfectly, and it had every detail I wanted. I really liked the characters, and I wanted to hang out with them more. So I read it on a train ride. So if that tells you anything, I read it just in a matter of hours. That's how good it was. In comparison, especially to the last book we reviewed, I loved the girlhood that was in this one. This was the best way to portray female friendships, I think. I think those are my main thoughts. Oh, other than I'll get into it later, but the treatment of the wife at the end. We'll let Izzy do her thoughts.
Well, that's a great segue for me because that's most of my thoughts. So I did think that the perspective that this book takes place from, being the ghosts of murdered victims, was really refreshing, because in a typical like mystery or whodunit, like the whole point is who done it, and we knew right off the bat exactly what was happening, and instead the tension came from like the frustration that ghosts and victims must have when like they know what happened but they can't tell anybody what happened, so they're trying to rely on police to pick up the pieces and get enough evidence. So it really worked for me, having the tension of the story be that way. But the part of the frustration from the ghost that I did not like was when they all got together and they saw where things were going. Granted, all three of them fell for his tricks before. All three of them were hoodwinked, got in his car, started a relationship with him, and were murdered. They immediately forgot that they had all fallen for his tricks and lost all empathy for his wife in the cabin. And that's a big problem that I had, because they bond together and they have so much empathy for one another and they have like a really strong bond, but all of that goes out the window when it comes to April, in my opinion, especially in the cabin, because what wasn't mentioned in the synopsis, because it's not a huge part of the story, is that the killer and his wife and their kids are very religious. Like, it's hinted throughout the story that they're part of the LDS church, like with the prepping and the no caffeine and things like that. It's not outright said, so this is just my my read on it. But in these sort of like very religious households, like the woman is supposed to be not questioning her husband, being subservient, like not taking any sort of aggressive position. And I think that that was beautifully set up throughout the rest of the book, but that nuance was completely lost on the ghosts. So when they're in the cabin, yes, they see what's going on because they've lived through it, but they forget that April had not seen that side of her husband yet and did have her doubts initially throughout the story, but I think some part of her still believed he was innocent
I mean,
until
how hard would it be for you to trust like everyone else over your husband? Because you would be like, no, I know my husband better than anyone. There's no way he's a serial killer.
right, like he I've seen him be 90% of the time a wonderful, loving father with our girls. How could that person go and then plan to murder them or murder other women? Like, of course he's being faithful. He's just working really hard. I think in that kind of like culture and scenario, like you wouldn't second guess your spouse, because that goes against all of the teachings in the Book of Mormon and the Bible. I understand that they're frustrated because they can't communicate, but there are several times that I noticed where they were just outright being mean about April and the situation and questioning how she couldn't see anything. And I think at one point call her dumb. Like it just rubbed me the wrong way, especially because the author did set up that nuance so perfectly. But I think if I was a ghost in that situation, I would probably feel the same way of like, dumb idiot, he's going to bury you in the woods with your babies. Get them out of here. What are you doing? But I just had some thoughts about how badly they treated April. I did also question why the author decided not to outright say what religion they were part of, because the only religion that I'm aware of that has like a apocalyptic prep for the rapture and doesn't drink caffeine is LDS members.
Well, authors have to be really careful about that because as soon as you have something like that in there, then it's not the book stance on it, or it's not a plot point of the
Yeah.
book, then it's this author is against like Mormons or something, or you're making it like a point.
Yeah. I will say I don't think this book would have worked had his normal life not been rooted in religion of some sort, but we see that commonly. I know that we're big true crime buffs, but we see that normally in people, I think, that are serial killers that do have like a pillar of the community front facing persona. So I thought this book did that really well. And like I said before, I absolutely loved the way that the ghosts were portrayed in the afterlife, and the plot was wonderful. But I did give this an 87 out of 100. I scored it quite a bit lower than you guys, just because I did not like the lack of empathy that the ghosts had for April, while simultaneously being empathetic for themselves. And that's something that they weren't, especially the one that was in the home, the first victim.
Mm-hmm.
When she'd go on his dates,
Mm-hmm.
she would like get super frustrated at the women there too, despite having fallen for all of his shit beforehand. So I don't know.
Was her frustration at the women, or because they couldn't hear her and she was desperately trying to reach them?
I think it was probably the second one, but it did come across as the first one quite a bit, with her literally yelling in their faces and saying, "Come on, he's roofied you. What are you doing? Stop drinking." And then my other question too is, one of the victims he took home that he had roofied, he had sex with, but none of the other victims. Like, he ended up keeping the one he had sex with alive, but was like disgusted with her and kind of wrote her off. But then none of the girls he actually murdered, he assaulted. So I'm kind of confused in that perspective too. Like, why suddenly the shift? So that's kind of why I rated it at an 87 out of 100, is just for like moments and characterization pieces that I didn't quite enjoy. Overall, though, I would highly recommend this book to anybody. This is probably one of the greatest mystery books I've read in a while.
I'll jump in and say I didn't read it so much as them disparaging April. I kind of read it as them just getting more and more frustrated that they couldn't reach her because they were trying incessantly, especially the first ghost, because she had been like with the family for so long. She ended up actually really liking April and the family. April knew a lot of she didn't know that he was a serial killer, but she had seen drawings that looked exactly like him posted on the news. She'd had like a friend turn him in, like he was wanted by the police. He was running from the police and from like being arrested, all of which, like, if she wasn't clinging to the ideal husband in her mind, like that's what she was doing throughout the book. She was ignoring those signs because she was like, oh, my husband would never do that. And then another sign would come along and she'd be like, no, he's my husband. I have to trust him. Like the long working hours, all this other stuff that started like adding up to a not pretty picture. She was ignoring to kind of keep herself sane, basically, is how I read it.
I would like to jump in here real quick before we move on
Yeah.
and bring up Ted Bundy and talk about how, like, even the crime novelist, ex-police officer that sat next to him, who turned him in, also thought that she was being silly and it didn't mean anything. So I think there is something to be said about the face some serial killers put on towards people in their lives that they aren't hurting, to kind of make up that persona. And I think that that's a large part of it. So I don't think that the blame is necessarily on April for just pushing those things under the rug. I think that genuinely she probably didn't have like I think she had doubts about her own mind, but I honestly don't think she thought that he did it until they got to the cabin.
And that's also true too. But I think just instinctively as humans, we we don't like things that would affect our worldview, right? If somebody
Mhm.
came up to me and said, hey, your husband's a serial killer, I'd be like, get out of here. There's no way.
Yeah, who are you talking about?
Right. And so it would take a lot of evidence to convince me that like he did it. Like, I don't know, his fingerprint, multiple of his fingerprints
I think
on the murder weapon, his DNA, like
I think Ryan would have to straight up tell me he did it for me to believe. I think, and even then, I think it'd be like, no, come on, that's not a funny joke. That's in poor taste.
but it would probably be incredibly frustrating for everybody else like around me because they'd be like, look, they have this evidence, like, and I'd be like, no, that's not the case. And I think that's what we see happening with April, and the ghosts who know
Yeah,
that he's a serial killer are like, wake up,
but
like
I don't
get out.
think that April knew about the evidence, is the thing. Like, yeah, they took the car, and she had like her friend saying, like, hey, I turned him in. And she did see the poster, but I think that's all she had. I don't think she had any of the other stuff too. But that's why this is such a good book. Like, we can sit here, we can talk about how the characters interact and decide if that's the correct way or if it was shitty or what it was. But at the end of the day, like, this book was really, really good, and I would recommend
Yeah, I'll let you guys know what I think about the situation on my second read through.
it. So y'all got to read through it again and see if we can come to a consensus. What did you think about it, Sam?
I was literally gonna say, I forgot I'm supposed to be talking. I was just so enraptured in your conversation that I forgot I'm a part of this also.
But
Um,
you're not listening to the podcast, Sam. You're on it.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Okay, let me gather my thoughts now that I'm speaking to you. I think the way that they acted towards April, I think is 100% how I would have acted. But I think their frustration wasn't necessarily at her, but at the situation. I like you guys said, but I think that my frustration mostly was just that like I wanted to yell at her too, like, girl, wake up. Like, how do you not see this? So having known people who were like in not good relationships to be like, girl, how do you not see this? And they're like, no, he's amazing. And I'm like, no, literally, he's the worst. So, like, I feel like her character was written really well too. And like you guys said, I think there would have to be so much scientific data and like a confession and like video evidence,
I want a video of him doing it, or else it's not true. Thank you.
right? Like I think it would take so much convincing for me to believe that somebody I loved did something that awful. E- Especially if they are so kind to my face and stuff. I'm like, no, like that doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
So I think that April's character, for even for as little as she was in the book, was so well written.
Hmm.
And I I can't even remember the guy's real name, but um the serial killer's like personality shifts. I think like the ghost that follows him home, she's like,
James. Sorry. I just remembered. James.
I wanted to call him John, so that was pretty close. That may have been one of his aliases even. And just like the fact that the ghost that was like living with them for a while even was like, it's amazing to see like how kind he is with the girls and how nice he is to April, and then to know what he did. This is also the first book I've ever read as an ebook,
Yeah.
and I think it was so good that I'm like convinced to buy a Kindle.
If your introduction to ebooks, because I don't care what anybody says, it is different than reading a physical book. If your introduction is with a shitty book, you're gonna kind of equate like, well, maybe I didn't get into it because it's an ebook. So I'm very happy that your introduction was with a good book, because even though it took me a little bit to get into it, honestly, I love reading ebooks on my phone or on my Kindle. It's just so much more convenient than lugging a backpack full of books, because same with you guys, on a trip, I need to bring 4 or 5
Yeah.
just to have stuff to
Yeah, no
read.
kidding. And when you have a kid, like you have the bottles and the diapers and the wipes, there's no room for books.
So you get like a
You
little
barely have room for your
compact Kindle
phone.
or your phone, and that's the way to do it. And then if you really, really love it, you can have some nice bookshelf candy.
This
Yeah,
is bookshelf candy.
yeah. I can't wait to buy it, especially the cover with the red shoe. Like now that
Mm,
I've seen that, I'm gonna have to make sure that my copy actually has that.
yeah. No, this is a good copy. This is a good cover. Both, like the other one's good too, but I feel way more intrigued to read the story based on the red shoe cover.
I do want to say, as we're wrapping down, I just, in my head, the book doesn't say this at all, but I just imagine them like just, searching out their memories every once in a while. Hopefully, the memories that they can go through include the ones that they've had as a ghost, because I just really wish that they can find each other in their little afterlives and visit
Yeah.
each other for a while. I'm tearing up. I
I
loved this
hope
book,
so.
guys. It was wonderful.
It was very good. I did, like I said, score it at an 87, but that's better than I scored Cersei. So that brings this one. See, let me pull it up again, but I think it was an average of, yep, 94 out of 100 for us. And this officially bumps Cersei off of number 1. This is the second episode, so we've only had 2 books. This one is at the number 1 spot so far.
And what book are we doing next week? Oh, keeper of the book
So
titles.
next week for episode 3, we will be discussing Under the Dome by Stephen King, which is a long one. It's over 1,000 pages, so everybody settle in.
Read fast because we're talking about it in a week.
Yes, and you have to be there on the day the episode comes out. So, yeah, so I think that wraps up our discussion of Ask for Andrea, however you pronounce it. So far, like we said, it's in the number 1 spot. We do have a Penny Dreadfuls page or group on Goodreads. If you want to let us know your thoughts, we'd love to read them. You can send us an email at pennydreadfulspodcast@gmail.com. And we always welcome suggestions for future books. So if there's a book you think we'd like, feel free to send us an email and we will add it to the list. Is there anything else you guys want to say?
Well, I almost said, see you guys next week. And then I stopped myself because I was like, no, that would be dumb. And then I was like, well, what do I say instead? And I just blanked. So
Okay.
awkward pause instead.
Well, I've got a pretty
No,
good line for us. So see you
oh,
guys
yeah.
next week.
Oh, my God.